Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 2020 webinar series. My name is Anna Popovich. I am Program Director with Humanist Canada. Humanist Canada is a national organization that promotes the separation of religion from public policy and fosters the development of reason, compassion, and critical thinking through our secular education and community support programs. Today's webinar is a joint effort, and I'm delighted to welcome our colleagues and co-hosts, Sean Watson, Gus Limpeluso, Kayla Horn from the Center for Inquiry Canada, Scott Fraser, President and Publisher at Dundurn Press. And our guest today is Farzana Doctor, a writer, activist, and psychotherapist. She is the author of the newly released novel 7, an exploration of female genital mutilation. Farzana is also the author of award-winning novels Stealing Nazreen, 6 Meters of Pavement, and All Inclusive. Farzana was recently named one of CBC Books' 100 Writers in Canada You Need to Know Now. She volunteers with Speak Out, a group that is working to ban female genital mutilation in her Dawood Bora community. Kayla, if you'd like to say a couple of words.
First of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming to Female Genital Mutilation, Religion, Culture, and Human Rights. So as Anna said, this event is jointly hosted by Center for Inquiry, your community for science and secularism, along with Humanist Canada. So my name is Kayla Horan-Dimitrek. I am a council member of Center for Inquiry Canada, and I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I've been involved for about 6 years. So CFIC is Canada's only national nonprofit with the mission of promoting and educating the public on critical thinking, science, and secularism. We work to equip people to make decisions based on evidence, rational thinking, and compassion. To that end, we hold events like this to provide an opportunity for you to engage with subject matter experts on a variety of topics. In these crazy days of physical distancing, all of CFIC's events and activities are provided online, available from coast to coast to coast. We rely entirely on donations and memberships to allow us to bring you events such as this. So please visit our website or email info@centerforinquiry.ca for more information about how to become a member or make a donation. So Anna's already done a pretty good job of introducing our guests, Farzana Doctor and Scott Fraser. So today, Scott is going to interview Farzana about her newest novel, 7, and its exploration of the issue of female genital mutilation or cutting. So I'd just like to give a very warm welcome to Scott and Farzana.
Thanks so much, Kayla. Before I kick off, I would just like to point out that I'm sitting here in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of a number of Indigenous people, and regardless of where we happen to be calling in from, assuming if you're in North America, I'd like you to take just a moment to think about what's about that legacy, that history, and how that's manifesting in our world today, especially if you're paying attention to the news. We're seeing stories every day about things happening in Ontario, the East Coast, the West Coast, up and down, north, south, east, and west. And I think it behooves us all to pay close attention to that and to incorporate that understanding into our day-to-day lives. So it's an absolute pleasure to be back here with the CFIC and Humanist Canada. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my cool friends and fellow travelers with you. Today I'll be speaking with Farzana, and Farzana, good afternoon. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all of the organizers for making this happen, and to all of you who are here watching today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So I hope you ask lots of questions, and do ask them in the Q&A so that we don't lose track of them.
Good point. Farzana, if I could, I'd like to start by reading something that I found on Wikipedia. I know, it's not always the most authoritative, but I'm going to go with this and see what happens. My hope is that you can just explain some of the terms that might not be familiar to, I mean, certainly terms that were very foreign to me. So here we go. In 2011, a group of Bora women posted a petition requesting that Sayedna Mohammed Burhanuddin ban Khatna. The response was that I'm going to paraphrase the response. The response was basically that Bora women should, understand that this is part of their culture and they should basically accept it without complaint. So there's a couple terms in there that I didn't know until I read your novel. Can you, so Khatna, Sayedna, and Bora, Dawoodi Bora, if you like. Can you, just before we get going, can you explain what those concepts are, what those words mean?
Sure, for sure. Maybe I'll start with talking about the Dawoodi Bora community. So the Dawoodi Bora community is a fairly small, our numbers are estimated to be somewhere between 1 and 2 million across the globe. There are diasporic communities all over North America, Europe, Australia, but the center of the community is in India and specifically in Mumbai. So Dawoodi Boras are a subsect of Shia Muslims, and we have our own very specific ways of doing everything. In most other kind of mainstream Muslim communities, female genital cutting or mutilation has been denounced as not part of the religion at all. So it's not considered Islamic. But amongst the very orthodox Dawoodi Boras, it's considered to be a part of the religion and an essential part of the religion. And that's as defined by the Sayedna. The Sayedna is our apex leader. So kind of like how Catholics have the Pope, we have our Sayedna, and the Sayedna changes, over time as one dies and then somebody else comes and takes his place. The Sayedna has become this figure that is almost, in my view, people think of him as godlike, even though he's not supposed to be considered that way. And the religious leadership in our community has become very, very controlling and seeks to control every aspect of an Orthodox Dawoodi Bora person's life, even the secular things. So just to give you one kind of silly example of that, a few years ago, the leadership demanded that people stop using what they called, commode or Western toilets and go back to the squat, hole in the ground toilets. And, people followed along with that. And when they didn't follow along with that, they were chastised. There were checks, home checks. So there are ways that this leader tries to enforce the rules as well. So that's Sayedna, that's Dawoodi Bora, and the third one was Khatna. Okay, so Khatna, in our community, it means cut, and it refers to both male and females. But for females, it's a cut to the clitoral hood. Now, there's no standardization because this practice is nearly always done by amateur cutters and in unhygienic kinds of conditions. When it is done even by a medical professional, and it is done by doctors now, and there we can talk about some of the cases, the legal cases against those doctors all around. When that does happen, it's still not standardized because people might understand that that anatomy is very delicate. The clitoral hood is like, I think, 1 millimeter thick. So often more damage is done than just to the clitoral hood. So is that a good overview?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good overview of those three terms. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a kind of a common baseline before we kept going. So I appreciate that. I just want to ask one quick follow-up. Is this I guess clerical reach into secular matters, is this a recent phenomenon within the Bora community? Or have the Sayednas always wanted to, I'm hearing that the line between secular and clerical is pretty thin in the Bora community. So it's not like the concept of like a separation of church and state or church and society doesn't quite seem to be there.
Yeah.
Is it recent, or is this always been the way?
It's been there for a while. So there was a recent 40 years or so ago uprising in the community where a reform movement started, and they mostly started because they were concerned about corruption from the religious leadership. And so after that uprising began, and if anyone is interested in learning more about that, there's this excellent book that came out right at the beginning of the pandemic by a guy named Shoukat Ajmeri. And I'm going to try to remember the name of it in a minute. So anyway, he's documented through fiction really well this uprising. And after that uprising, what often happens is there's kind of this regressive backlash against the community to keep everyone in line. And one of the things that happened in a big way at that point was social shunning. So, if you were out of line, if you were criticizing the Saidna, if you were like really publicly flouting things, you could be socially shunned, which meant that your cousins couldn't speak to you, even your mother couldn't speak to you. And this is really dangerous for people who are very, very connected in the community, because the example I like to give, and this is a real example of someone I know, that if my father owned a hardware store that served the Bora community, and I was speaking out publicly on Facebook, say, people would stop shopping at his store, and that would be devastating. So,
right.
Yeah.
So it's like a large amount of community pressure is contributing to the perpetuation of Khatna and other forms of social control. So I think that's a good segue into talking more specifically about the novel. Once again, the title is 7. We're going to be posting links throughout to various places where you can buy it. And of course, it's also should be by now available in your local libraries and pretty much everywhere that you're used to discovering great books. So Farzana, this is your 4th novel, and I don't think it would be a stretch to say that it's your most controversial. Tell us a little bit about the story without giving us any spoilers, but just tell us what's going on in this novel.
Yeah, so this novel is about, there's actually 2 perspectives. So the first one is a 40-year-old woman named Sharifa who goes to India with her husband, who's an academic, and their daughter, Z, who's 7. They go to India. She's thinking that she's going to spend her time doing some historical research about a revered ancestor and homeschooling her kid. And in the process of her sleuthing, she finds out some other family secrets because it's 2016. And in 2016, this issue around Khatna and the controversies around it were really boiling over in the community, and they continue to be. But she arrives in India not knowing anything really about this issue, and she has these 2 cousins who are on opposite ends of the debate. She has one cousin, Zainab, who believes in the practice, and the other cousin, Fatima, who is fighting it. And then she has to sort of sort out where she fits in all of it. Interspersed throughout the novel, there are these interludes of her great-great-grandfather, the person she's researching. So we kind of learn what she doesn't know, because she's able to research kind of the structure of his life, but is very curious about who he was personally. And so we get these little interludes where we find out what's going on in his relationships with each of his wives. He had 4 wives, one after the other, because wives were dying, and he divorced one. And so she's kind of learning about his more intimate life. And even through that, we kind of learn about some of the history around Khatna.
I want to pull that thread, because I had a note here to remind myself. Don't forget to ask about the I guess I'll call it the B plot involving the research into the ancestor. So this is a case of art imitating life, or life inspiring art. So you actually or you or someone in your family did something very comparable with a great family patriarch. What are the pros and cons of putting so much of yourself into your fiction, or if not yourself, at least like something that's very close to home?
Yes, and this is the novel where I did the most of it, and I think I was ready to do that because, I have been through this 3 times before. I could imagine what it would be like to be interviewed about this book and so on, and I kind of, I wasn't so intimidated about bringing more of things that are close to home. So let me talk about the Abdulali character, the great great grandfather. So he was heavily inspired by my own great great grandfather, who is this sort of mythical figure in our own family. And a number of years ago, I started to do a little bit of research about him, and I created a blog of everything that I collected. I'm not a great historical researcher, so I put up what I could, and I said to the family, like, somebody else do more, but here we have, the basis. And so, I pulled some of the really fascinating things from my own great great grandfather's life and put it into Abdulali. And then around the Kutna story. So I am a survivor of Kutna myself. And so that was the harder one, to try to figure out where were my own boundaries around what I wanted to talk about. And, one of the great things about writing fiction, right, is, I think I'm a fiction writer first and an activist second. And so my goal with this book was to create a beautiful book, a great story, page turner, all that kind of stuff. And then you can nicely weave in these difficult issues.
Well, I can say as a reader, I mean, I've read the final version. I've read an earlier version and an earlier draft. I think you've mission accomplished in terms of creating something that is an enjoyable reading experience. Congratulations on that. It's for everyone. I'm not just blowing smoke. It is a great book. I do not spend my Saturdays doing this for every Dundurn author. So that this is one that I think one of the reviewers said that this is a book that's going to stay with you for a long time after you finish it. I'm still wrestling with the book, and I've finished it. The last version I finished over a month, well over a month ago now. So
Can
far
I-
as any,
oh
yeah.
My partner just texted me the name of that book I was trying to remember. It's called Keepers of the Faith, in case anyone
Keepers of the Faith.
Yeah.
So if anyone's interested in finding out more about the history of the Bora, the contemporary history of the Boras, you can do so there. That's great. So you've received coverage in the CBC, the Globe, all over the blogosphere, the podcast. You've been everywhere with this book. Is the attention? How's your family reacting? Like I'm imagining, like this is a thing where it's like, if your dad is running a hardware store and you're sitting here criticizing elements of your people, of your culture, like, have people said like, oh God, Farzana's written another book and we're in it, or like how are people responding to it?
Well, luckily my dad doesn't own a hardware store that Boras go to. I think that I'm in a very privileged position to write a book like this because I grew up with a lot of these influences that allowed me to do it. So my dad denounced the religion very young, renounced the religion very young. He probably, like a group like Humanist Canada and CFI, he was very upset with the corruption and the way that power was being used by the Zayedna. So he renounced the religion when he was a young man. My mother was lukewarm. My mother was probably a little bit like the Sharifa character, perhaps somebody who likes to have some element of tradition and faith and the culture in her life. And so I grew up with those influences, but then the larger community, the wider community, we have a whole mix, the whole continuum of no one believes anything and everyone believes everything. So like we have everybody, and there is this very big gray area, murky middle, I think, amongst Boras, of people who are kind of like they want the connection to the community and they don't want social shunning, so they won't speak out about anything. Anyway, so I have all of those people in my life. I have been a little bit like, I'm not calling up the Orthodox people right now to find out what they're thinking about it, because I'm really, really busy with this book, and it's a lot of energy, and I just don't have bandwidth to deal with anybody who is going to be abusive or gaslighting. There's a lot of denial around this issue in my community. There are people in the community who say it's not FGM what we do, it's just this little nick, and of course that's complete fiction. So I haven't gone seeking out anybody's reactions, but my father is very supportive.
Good.
My father has said that he's enjoying it. I have an uncle and aunt who have told me that they've enjoyed it. Another cousin who's very supportive of all of my writing and has read everything and has said those kinds of things. So amongst the people who I am closest to, there's been really positive responses. Yeah.
I want to turn to the chat here, or the Q&A. I don't quite. It's an anonymous questioner. It says FGM is child abuse. Why are we then using terminology that doesn't reflect that? I'm not sure what that refers to. But I also, so if the questioner wants to rephrase that, unless Farzana, you can, I'm just not clear what the question is. But like, is there any ambiguity about your position that this is something that should stop?
No, and the activists in the community very much think that it's child abuse. It's a form of child abuse, even if the intention isn't that. Like there are many people in our community who don't understand that it's harmful, and so for those people, they would say, why are you saying that we're harming our children, right? Mm-hmm. But we have done enough education in the last 5 years that people can't say that they don't know anymore. And so yes, we very much think of it as a form of abuse, and it causes trauma, long-lasting trauma that then you have this job of having to resolve. Mm-hmm. It's not easy, and there's a lot of terminology, by the way. Some people say female genital cutting because they feel like it's more accurate. Other people say it's mutilation because they feel like that's more accurate. So we tend to say FGMC as a way to include all those perspectives. In our community, what we call it Kutna. Every community has their own specific label, that has to do with their own history. Some people call it female circumcision. Many of those people are people who are wanting to equate it with male circumcision, which is a pitfall. So there's a lot of different ways that people talk about it. And mostly what I want to say is people don't talk about it. There's such a culture of silence around this issue that people just don't talk about it.
Good. Well, one of the obvious impacts that we see in the lives of Shari and her husband Murti is it has an impact on their relationship. And you write in the marketing copy that their sex life was important as a way for in particular, I think, for outsiders to view the impact of FGMC and the long-term impact on women and their health and their relationships. Can tell us a little bit about that. I mean, what are either in reference to the novel or in reference to the broader issue? What are some of the lasting impacts, and why is it so important to keep pushing on this issue?
And I really wanted to talk about the nuances of all of that through the characters, because, no one person is going to have the same experience, right? So I have, one character who says, I haven't had any problems, it's no big deal. And then another one who says that she has a lot of pain, sexual pain, So there's a variety of things. And I think that anybody who understands how sexual abuse works or sexual assault works, it's a lot of the same symptoms that people have in terms of their emotional, psychosexual kinds of responses. So difficulty trusting people, you can have freeze responses, hypervigilant kind of responses while being sexual. You can have physiological things like a great deal of pain. And there's also a lot of dissociation. Dissociation is a very common experience for survivors of all of these things, and that can have some very difficult impacts in people's lives and relationships as well. And then, there are other forms of FGM too. So Kutna is considered to be one of the least extreme forms of FGM. They're all terrible and they're all traumatic. But when you get to some of the more extreme forms, people can have difficulties in childbirth. They can have difficulties with urination. They just like their whole that whole region of your body can start to have problems. You know, fibroids and cysts, and we store our trauma near the location that it happens.
I mean, I've heard some pretty horrible stories from other parts of the world, and I have to admit that I was completely ignorant of the fact that this was happening in India. Could you tell me, like, what is the legal status in India? What, like, it's illegal, I think, right?
It hasn't been banned as a practice, like FGM itself is not banned. It's not illegal. You could probably use other areas of law to prosecute, but there's no such thing happening in India. And the Modi government and the Saidna are very much intertwined, which is a kind of interesting thing. I think it has to do with the Saidna, the religious leadership, has so much money and they give major political donations to whoever's in power at the time. And so the Modi government has said that they don't even acknowledge that it happens in India, even though we've been talking about it for 5 years. And just as a side note, this is why most people don't know that it's happening in India, is because it's only been in the last 5 years that activists have had a public discourse around it. Whereas, you know, in Canada, women from different parts of Africa, for example, Somali women have been really amazing about like talking about this for like 25, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
We know more about, you know, what happens to them and, you know, what happens in Somalia, for example. So it's not illegal in India. And we have a petition that has almost like over 200,000 signatures. So we would love people to go and sign that petition. If you're on Twitter, you can find it at Speak Out on FGM. It's the pinned post. So it's not illegal. And can I also just tell you that we understand now it happens in 92 countries across the world. As we normalize this conversation, more and more people are speaking out. And in the last couple of years, we've been hearing from white women in the US who are talking about how it's happened to them too. So I think as we keep talking about this, we're just going to learn just how widespread injury to girls' genitals is.
That is that's shocking on the one hand, but I think, you know, as a society and as a society and as individuals, I think I can probably speak for everyone in the audience that, you know, it's a group of people here who really are concerned about the rights of girls and women, and to learn that, like I'm on my back foot right now. I've just my mind is exploding. I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
Because
you know how I see it, because I mean I've been talking about this for so long, I can say these things without tearing up, you know, but how I think about it, you know, the thing I want, you know, social justice folks to really kind of understand is that Khatna, or female genital cutting and mutilation, is just on this continuum of all of the other kind of patriarchal and gender-based violence that exists everywhere, including, you know, in our own communities in Canada and all of that, right? So it's not unrelated to sexual harassment. It's not unrelated to sexual assault. It's not even unrelated to the fact that women are still making like 73 cents to the dollar, right? So I just kind of think of it as we have this whole continuum of things that happen that are called gender-based violence. And this used to be something that was such a shocking thing, even to me. But if we put it on that continuum, we just kind of understand it with all the rest.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that is a helpful way of framing it. When I don't know how you feel about this, but I know like a lot of feminist activists refer to the patriarchy, and I put a deliberate emphasis on the definite article. Do you think it's fair to say, as a feminist with experience in multiple cultural settings, that we're not so much talking about the patriarchy as opposed to a variety of different patriarchies? Like, is the Bora form of patriarchy the same as the you know, English Canadian, WASP version of patriarchy? Are there multitudes of patriarchy, and how does that complicate, if that's the case, how does that complicate your work?
I think it's the same patriarchy, but there are so many different manifestations. So, so if we think that like Kutna is done to control girls, women, and I should also say non-binary, because some of the people who were, born girls are now grown up and could be trans today and so on. So it's to control sexuality, right? So that's what Kutna does, and it's done in this particular way. But let's think about how, how girls, women's, and non-binary people's sexuality is controlled, say, amongst white secular Canadians. There's all kinds of ways that, we're just taught that we're taught really confusing messages about sexuality anyway, because we live in a very sex negative society, but we're also flooded with all of these sexual images. We're told that if we're sexually assaulted, that our skirts were too short. So that, like that kind of an example, don't wear that, don't go there at night, is a different manifestation of controlling sexuality.
Right. I'm going to go back to the chat now, and I think I need to catch my breath too. So I'm going to see. I'm going to see. Claire wants to go back to the question of the United States. Is FGM or C, is that happening in the States in the context of a particular religious group, or is it because I think you specifically mentioned that this is happening to white girls and women. Is this tied to a religion? Is this converts to a religion? Is this like a practice? Tell us a little bit more about that. Help us understand what's happening.
There have been two women who have come forward and have shared their stories. One of them is a woman named Renee Bergstrom, and this happened to her about 50 years ago when she was a child. And for her, it happened when she went to, her mother caught her masturbating, and then her mother didn't know what to do about that, went to the doctor, and the doctor used it as kind of like a cure for over sexualized, and it wasn't, masturbation is normal, but anyway, that's what happened in her case. And then there's a much younger woman who shared her story, and I think it was connected to a particular Christian group that she was with, but I can't remember which one. Well, yeah,
I think, like, and I'm going to come back to sort of talking, like trying to build a bridge between. I'm hopelessly tangled in my wires here. I'm so sorry. I want to go back to talking about like how to bridge the activist work that you're doing with and just explore and see if there's any overlap between what the members of the CFIC are doing or Humanist Canada. So there's a campaign that's been organized within the Bora community, led by Bora feminists. Do you want outside help from potential allies, and what does constructive allyship look like?
Yeah, so allies, yes. So the way to be an ally, I think, is really to follow the lead of the feminists on the ground in all of these places. So follow the groups on social media, amplify their messages by sharing them. There's also an organization that's newly formed in the last year and a half called the End FGMC Canada Network. And that's a network of any individual who's interested, any organization that's interested in this issue, even if you're not currently working on this issue, but would be interested. You can join for free. And right now they're doing a lot of sharing of information. They're talking to the government about creating a national action plan, because the Canadian government does zilch around all of this, even though it's illegal here too. So you can follow on Twitter, it's Canada FGM follow and support, give donations, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's how you do it. And one of the things we're trying to do in Canada is to just raise the level of discourse around this, so that it can be normalized, or it can be talked about. You know, there's this idea that maybe there's about 100,000 survivors.
In
So
Canada.
yeah, yeah. And so that means that, like, it's someone, you know, maybe in your staff group, somebody in your neighborhood, someone at your school, you know. So so I would say, like, if you have any interest in this, just join that group probably, and that will be a good way to get involved.
I saw a question come through the chat, and I'm wondering if that person can put it in the Q&A, just so I don't have to sift through the chat history. But while that goes on, in Canada we've seen some politicians, and primarily of the conservative variety, talking about things like, you know, barbaric cultural practices, hotlines, and stuff like that. That to me, it's like, if you're trying to influence the behavior of an in group, like say the Boras, to me it's like, you know, setting up snitch lines, or asking people to surveil. It's probably like to me, first of all, I think that's kind of authoritarian, but it's also I guess it's like probably not going to work. Like you can't. So and I did see something come through the Q&A that mentions the fact that the actual application of Katna is this happens within the realm of women, right? So how do we square that circle? Like what like you've got people in you know, mainstream Canadian society who might be concerned about this issue. We have some idea about how to be a constructive ally now. But like, what do you do when you've got Bora women who are doing this to Bora girls?
Yeah. So let me just give some perspective about that. Like, yes, it is women who are perpetrating this because they have been told that it's not harmful, and it's just part of the culture and religion, and it's something that is required by the Saidna. So they're just following the rules. I don't know if you're familiar with Muna al-Tahawi, but she talks about how women are often the foot soldiers of the patriarchy, right? So I think that's what's happening. And all of those women who are who are perpetrating the FGM are also survivors themselves. So there's this kind of intergenerational violence. And, you know, to just take a moment to think about what that is that you carry all of this like secrecy and shame around it. And so inside of yourself, until you break your own silence around it, you can't really look at it, right? You can't really take a really good look at it. And so you just carry on in this kind of automatic way, doing it to the next generation until you stop, right? So that's a piece of it, right? But how do we then help? How do we make change? So there's a few ways that there are two organizations in the Dawoodi Bora community. One is called We Speak Out, that I'm part of, and another one called Sayo. And a lot of it has to do with conversations, figuring out how to open up conversations with your aunties, with your grandmother, with your father, with the, you know, to start the conversation, because no one talks about this. So let me just, I would like to show you, I'm going to share screen if that's okay.
Go for it.
I want to show you a couple of things that we've done in the community. So I'm going to go here and just to show you what we do on social media. So I'll just skip down to this slide. So this is a slide of, you know, people holding up signs, and this is very intentional. One woman who's wearing the more orthodox religious attire on the right, and one who's not. So saying, "I am Bora and I am against Katna," and on the left she's saying, because children cannot give informed consent, and on the right she's saying, because women make decisions with their brains, not their private parts. This is one example of an early campaign we did. And here's an example of a more recent February 6th is the International Day of Zero Tolerance for female genital mutilation. So we had this campaign last February, and it was called the Be the One campaign. And we had all of these different images of like being the aunt, being the uncle, being the father, being whoever who was going to protect the kid from cuffs is another insider cultural term that's used for Kutna.
Mm-hmm.
So we also, that's another piece, is we use those terms, right, so that people understand. And this particular campaign came out in 3 different languages, you know, to get to people. And so we have an image here of 2 grandmothers, be the grandma who protects her grandchild from cuffs. And I want to tell you that these are my 2 grandmas. On the left is my dadi, who is my dad's mom. And on the right is my mom's mom, my nani. My dadi is now deceased, and she was very orthodox. She was a very big believer, and she probably would not have consented to have her photo used in this campaign. So I went to my nani, and my nani gave permission to use this photo. Now, my nani is an example of how you change, how you talk about things to help people understand and change their minds. So, you know, in my generation, it's believed that 85% of girls had to go through Kutna. My mother's generation was probably close to 100, and definitely in these women's generation, it would have been absolutely 100, and they would have just, you know, believed that it was the right thing to do. Since all of this has been going on, however, she has been involved. Her image has been in 2 different campaigns. So this is a woman, old woman, 96 years old, who has changed her mind about Kutna.
Well, that's fantastic. It's what a beautiful picture, and I think it kind of it reminds me of the theme in your book of that kind of that desire to belong. Like we all want family, we all want community, but sometimes that desire bumps up against competing values, like in this case, the individual rights of girls and women. So I want to go back to I missed part of a question in the Q&A, and we're running out of time, so I just want to make sure that we're giving everyone a chance. So this is a question it was a follow-on question to the point raised about the fact that this is implemented by women. What are Bora men doing? Are they sort of, you know, in this cone of ignorance where they don't really know what is going on down there, and or is this something that, you know, are the guys talking about this, or are they just on the sidelines oblivious?
Yes, they would have been, most would have been oblivious. It was kept a secret, again, never talked about, so not talked about with the men. So it sounds very strange, but it's true. In my book, one of the things that I talk about with this newer generation, with Murtaza, who is a dad who's very involved in parenting his child, he's like quite aghast that this could be possible, that he wouldn't know, you know, that his own daughter could be, you know, in danger of this, and he didn't know that his wife had gone through this, and so on. So, or his sisters and mother and all of that. So when men do find out about it, they go into the same kind of shock that, you know, perhaps the audience who's hearing about this for the first time are going through as well. When I first talked to my father about this a few years ago, he was like, no, we don't do that in our community. So that's where he was starting from. So yeah, the men don't know, but I would say after 5 years of education, more men know about it.
Right.
They can't say that they don't.
You know, I mean, I think in any patriarchal society, it's gonna take the fellas a little longer to catch up to like the legitimate grievances that girls and women have, right? I mean, it's it doesn't affect me, but I actually want to go back to talking about how it does affect, like how does it affect Murti? I mean, he's a guy, like, and you and I have talked about this on another forum, where it's like he's a really good guy, a good husband, a good father, but he's also like, he's kind of driving his wife a little bit, like they have like the obliviousness of it, of the cluelessness. It's really it's I guess talk about how this impacts families again, like that trust. Like again, you've talked about like on the individual level of like psychologically what happens. Like what happens to families that are discovering this, that this is happening in their own
You know,
home.
a key thing to this is betrayal, right? Betrayal of the victim, betrayal of other family members if they don't know what's happening. And so what happens when, you know, people are experiencing betrayal is they break connections. And so that can have a huge impact on families. And yeah, Murti, I wrote Murti and Shari in a very intentional way. So Shari doesn't know anything about Katna when she arrives in India, except for like she has these vague notions about it. And I really wanted her to be someone who was a bit clueless so that she could very slowly find things out and so that the reader could find things out in digestible ways too. But she's very, very tightly like, she's a kind of a closed person, Shari. And Murthy is not. Murthy is a guy who likes to know everything. He feels safe in the world by researching the hell out of everything, which drives her bananas, right? But, you know, so that was a way of having her be like kind of like stuck in denial and him pushing her and pushing her and pushing her. He also ends up being this amazing ally, and I won't get into all of that because I don't want to give too much of the story away, but partners have this huge role to play in being allies in healing. You know, there's this thing we understand about sexual trauma that you can do as much work as you can as an individual in, you know, therapy or whatever. But, you know, trauma is housed in the body, and, you know, how we experience our bodies, particularly when we're with somebody else, is a whole other matter. And so we often need somebody with us to help us to do aspects of the healing.
Well, that's yeah, and I think when when folks are reading this book, they're going to see the relationship. At least this is my subjective, and maybe I'm completely projecting my own relationship anxieties onto Shari and Murti. But you see this guy who's like he's chasing her for contact, for intimacy, and she's kind of turtling or running away or hiding from it, and the effect is like every time Murti pursues, it pushes Shari to kind of reveal like a fish out of water. Let's like show us a little bit more about this world, a little bit more about the setting. So now you hear the editor in me. I'm just getting excited about the literary devices that you use to reveal this to us. So
Can we tell the audience, just as a teaser, there's some really good sex scenes in this book.
Yeah, I have to say this. Someone slapped my wrist a little bit for bringing this up in kind of a flippant way with you at a previous event. And so I said, okay, I promise I'll be on my best behavior. I won't editorialize about the sex scene. But since you brought it up, I'm going to say it again. There is a really nice erotic and intimate sex scene in this. Amongst, I would say, like that there are many sort of false starts and stops and starts, and then finally they get it right, and it's really rewarding as a reader. So thanks again. So Shauna has just posted the links to where you can buy the book again. Very, very conscious about the time. I also want to point out that pretty much, beyond the three options that you have on your screen, Dundurn.com, Amazon, and Indigo, if you're lucky enough to live in an area with an independent bookstore, I strongly encourage you to consider supporting your local independent. If you're in Toronto, Another Story Bookshop, Different Book List, Queen Books, Book City have all carrying the book. If you're in Ottawa, you've got options like Octopus Books, Perfect Books. Montreal, you've got Paragon. I'm going to forget all of the retailers, but my big point is that if you are lucky enough to have a strong independent retailer in your neck of the woods, go ahead and please support them. They're all carrying the book as well. But for me, I couldn't possibly post all of the regional links because I know that we've got members from right across coast to coast to coast. in these two organizations.
Another story is organizing signed copies for anyone in Canada as well. So they'll ship across Canada. So that's another story.ca.
Fantastic. And I will say that Another Story has been a big supporter of Farzana's over the years. They've been a big supporter of mine over the years, and they're the place to go for books with a particular focus and emphasis on social justice. And they do a lot to support writers of color as well. So vote with your dollars. Buy the book, buy it from the retailer that makes you feel best about your purchase. But most importantly, buy and read the book. In the last couple of moments here, I just a couple more questions coming in. If you have more questions, you've got a couple minutes to get them in. We'll get in as many as we can, but we are coming to the end here. Farzana, could you please say a few words about the historical origins of FGM? Quote, pleasure is not essential for women, end quote. Is this the main argument? Is there another argument in support of this practice?
I couldn't tell you how it works for all the communities out there, but I can say that we have some theories about where where it came from within our own community. So historically, our community is mostly a merchant kind of class community, which historically meant a lot of travel for the men. And so there's a belief that because women were alone at home, that this is one of the ways to control the sexuality, to make them less interested in sex and therefore not cheat. But there is kind of specificity across different cultures. So I don't want to talk about other cultures, but the main thing that crosses over is just controlling the sexuality, as though it's something terrifying, as though it's something that needs to be controlled.
Right. I saw, well, I mean, in days gone by, kings would employ eunuchs to make sure that that the women in their harems were not having any extra harem dalliances. So like people have come up with all kinds of like weird and abusive ways of controlling women's sexuality. Sometimes even just by lopping off a guy's testicles, like as a way of controlling women. It's seems like it's a human. It's happened right across a range of cultures. I'm looking back here in the chat. Someone is asking. It's a touchy thing. I've noticed that men who are circumcised for non-religious reasons will insist their sons also be circumcised. Do you have anything to say about male circumcision? I do, but
yeah, I would say around male circumcision, this is something that is being widely contested across the globe as well, and people need to start giving a second look to why they're doing that. Historically, it would have been done under the banner of cleanliness, or to reduce disease and that kind of thing. But in modern times, that's no longer required, and that whole issue of consent is still would still impact guys, right? So I would say it is a really touchy issue. So this is an example of how it's a cultural practice. It's a social norm that just gets passed down, and people just believe it's correct.
Right. Like a fish doesn't know that it's wet. It's just it's if you don't know any different. I mean, I think I think most people would probably associate male circumcision with the Abrahamic religions, but like a lot of Christians don't do it. But some do, right? Like it's a weird, and then there's a generational issue too. I think like a lot of boys in my cohort, regardless of religious background, were circumcised because that's just what you do. If you have a baby who's born with a penis, you have to cut the end off for some reason. I mean, personally, I would love to get to a point where we just leave kids' genitals alone. But hey, maybe that makes me weird. I don't know.
There's a whole community of people called the intactivists who are trying to educate people about why they don't need to do this anymore.
Well, I mean, that sounds like something that a lot of us here would like to check out. That's cool. Anything else you want to share with us, Farzana? We're right at 3 o'clock. I'm going to look at the Q&A one last time, but if there's anything else, okay, from Lois, are you able to comment on in which communities FGM is more prevalent? I think we've addressed parts of that it does happen in, well, I'll let.
It's global at this point. How we describe it is that it happens on every continent except for Antarctica. We're learning about it happening in Russia, in Colombia and South America. It's across the Middle East, it's across Asia, different countries in Africa. And then what don't we know about elsewhere, because we've never talked about it. So just assume that it's a global problem. Yeah.
Well,
I say just thank you so much. Thank you for interviewing me, Scott. And, thank you to the CFI people and the Humanist Canada people and all of you who came today and who've been watching on the live stream. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the interest in my book and this issue.
Well, it certainly was my pleasure. I will speak with you about your book and your writing and your work anytime, whether or not there's an audience. Really big thanks to CFIC and to Humanist Canada, and to your members. One of these days I'm going to buy a membership to one or both of your organizations, and we'll just make this this friendship more formal. In the meantime, Scott Fraser, publisher at Dundurn Press, Farzana Doctor's new novel is called Seven. There are many ways that you can get it in any format that you want, including an audiobook. We partnered with Penguin Random House to produce the audio edition of Seven, which you can also find anywhere where you buy your audiobooks. I guess that's it for us. Shauna, do we want to sign off? Does someone want to say a few concluding?
I'll just close off because it looks like we've answered everybody's questions in line. So on behalf of CFIC, I'd like to thank Humanist Canada and Dundurn Press, all our volunteers, and also everyone who has attended this event. And we invite you to check out our websites and meetups for more information about our upcoming events and how you might become more involved. And again, many thanks to Farzana and Scott for a powerful and enlightening discussion.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
everybody, and thanks to our audiences as well. Stay safe and connected, everybody.